If I don't get what I want, I'm gonna get rid of that old lady.
What? Have you lost your mind, Mike? You want to commit a crime for money?
I don't have any other solution. Otherwise, I'll lose everything.
Hello, my name is Victoria. I'll share with you the story of my brother and what he did to my aunt for her money. So, let's start at the beginning of the story. My aunt, Victoria, had inherited the house from her parents. My father gave up his right to it and convinced the rest of the siblings to do the same because she was single and over 50 years old. That house was her only refuge. I loved my aunt, especially because I carried the same name due to my father's attachment to her. I was very proud of that because she was an educated, ambitious, and very kind person. I was overjoyed whenever she invited me to spend weekends and summer breaks with her alone, despite the significant age difference between us. I never felt bored in her company. She knew how to keep me occupied with reading, trips to the amusement park, and her delicious cooking. Years passed, and I got married while Victoria grew old. However, she never lost her youthful spirit that distinguished her. I continued to visit her house as much as I could because my aunt was the last remaining member of my father's family after he and his siblings passed away. But I also had to balance my work and my husband. I knew that I am pregnant, so I started visiting Victoria intermittently because of what the doctor told me. I had to minimize my car rides to avoid harming the fetus. Meanwhile, my brother Mike started visiting his aunt suddenly, as he only visited her once a year or every 2 years. I mentioned the matter to my concern and intention not to leave her alone. Initially, my mother used to go with him, but she quickly got tired due to her age. Victoria didn't like my brother very much because he was lazy and mostly lived off the allowance our mother gave him from our father's retirement pension. He quickly spent that money on his pleasures and asked for more and more. He didn't ask me for anything once he realized I wouldn't spend on him or my husband. I tell him, "We work hard to earn our salaries, and you should work too. Don't you want to start a family someday?"
A family? To become like you? No thanks. I'm a free person. I do as I please whenever I want. Don't you want to help your only brother? You're so stingy.
It didn't occur to me that Mike's sudden interest in his aunt was motivated by self-interest. I genuinely believed he had some conscience and affection, but I was mistaken. Adults don't change. They only get worse over time. My brother saw Victoria as a source of benefit, not only because of the retirement salary she received, but also for the house. The truth was that a large complex was going to be built nearby, and the company needed the land where her house was located. How did he find out? Unfortunately, it was from me after I mentioned that my aunt's house was the only obstacle to building the complex and that it had become very expensive. But that was months ago, and I had completely forgotten about it. He hadn't. Victoria welcomed my brother warmly, and he played the role of the affectionate nephew who wanted nothing more than her well-being. After several visits to her, he convinced her to host him permanently. Mike knew how to manipulate people and make them surrender to him. Months passed, and my pregnancy became difficult to the point where I had to quit my job and stay home. My only connection to Victoria was through the phone, and she would tell me about Mike, who would bring her groceries from the supermarket and clean the house with her. But she missed me and my pure heart, as she said. In one of our conversations, Victoria told me that she wanted to write the house in my name, and I was very happy to hear the news. First, because it proved her love for me, and secondly, because the house was big and beautiful and I planned to have many children. I was afraid that my house and husband would be too small for that. I asked her if Mike was aware of this, and she replied that she didn't tell him anything so as not to upset him since he wouldn't inherit anything from her. But my brother was constantly monitoring Victoria day and night, trying to find a way to convince her to sell and get a commission from the company. He overheard our conversation and the rest of our discussions, realizing that his backup plan in case the first one failed, which involved waiting to get his share of the house after Victoria's death, was dissipating before his eyes. So he started pressuring his aunt, and soon enough, several things went wrong in the house. The heating and hot water system malfunctioned, and poor Victoria fell ill due to the freezing cold. Then the phone and electricity went out, and every time someone came to fix the issues, they reappeared. Mike wanted to make the house uninhabitable to speed up my aunt's decision to sell. But Victoria remained steadfast, perhaps to keep the house for me because, as I mentioned before, she loved me as if I were her own daughter. This angered my brother and convinced him to resort to a much more terrible solution. The only solution was for my aunt to die before she could write the house in my name. Time was running out for Mike, so he took her with him to fetch some supplies.
Come on. It's not good for you to sit on your couch all the time. It's not good for your health. You'll accompany me this time.
They bought everything they needed, and when they exited the supermarket, my brother asked his aunt to wait for him in the garage while he fetched the car. After a few moments, my aunt saw a car approaching her at high speed and realized it was going to hit her. In a spontaneous reaction, she pushed the cart in front of her, veering in the opposite direction to avoid the cart and crashing into the garage column. Because he was driving at a tremendous speed, he suffered physical injuries, and when they took him to the hospital, his condition was critical, and they thought he wouldn't survive. But they performed several surgeries on him, and he came out physically recovered but mentally impaired because he had received the impact on his head, as he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and the airbag didn't deploy. Did this happen thanks to divine intervention? Definitely. For a long time, my aunt thought Mike lost control of his vehicle, and she never suspected that he wanted to kill her. As for me, I had strong doubts. I knew Mike was harmful, but I didn't understand his motives or why he would do something like that until I received a call from the company that wanted to buy the house.
We're trying to reach Mr. Mike. Is he available?
No, I'm his sister, and this is our mother's home number. I'm here for a visit.
Can you give us another number? He's not answering his mobile.
That's because he's in the hospital. He had a terrible accident.
Oh, I see. You said you're his sister. Maybe you can help us.
They explained to me that they had made an agreement with my brother to convince my aunt to sell her house in exchange for a large commission. They added that Mike told them in their last conversation that he would soon become her heir, which would facilitate the negotiations. So I didn't tell my aunt what my brother intended to do to her to avoid saddening her, and she died without knowing. As for Mike, he spends his days in an institution specializing in mental disabilities. He who digs a hole for someone will fall in it himself.